Thanks for joining today's live video. I want to quickly introduce myself again just to really kick things off as our first official live video with the group. There's a ton of content that we want to share with you this week and in the upcoming weeks around mediation. It's something that we get all the time from publishers that we work with on a day-to-day basis. How do I choose a mediation partner? How do I best optimize my waterfall? How do I think about making adjustments to my waterfall? And then, of course, what does bidding technology really mean for mediation in general? So I'd like to cover just at a very high level first what mediation is, in case there's anyone joining who is less familiar with what this technology is. But effectively, mediation is just a technology or solution that helps you set up, manage, and monitor different ad networks in one place. This also means that you have the ability to utilize multiple demand sources without having to use all of the different SDKs and really weighing down your app. So on the supply side, you're able to essentially reach as many advertisers as possible because every mediation and every demand source is going to have a slightly different set of advertisers, meaning you're going to get to as close to 100% fill as possible, meaning that every time a user is using your app and wants to see, for example, a rewarded video, almost 100% of the time they really should be able to get that video, meaning you're earning more revenue per user and your DAUs will be sufficiently satisfied with the ad experience that they're getting. Something that we hear a lot is, well, once I create a mediation setup, like, what should I be using? Should I be using auto optimization? Should I be using manual priority? And so those are effectively the two mediation options you have when you're optimizing. Auto optimization essentially means that depending on the mediation platform you're using, there is an algorithm that effectively identifies the highest CPM possible. And this is at the ad network level for each of your unique waterfalls. And that's serving ads to them based in real-time trends. And so depending on the mediation platform that you're using, this is looking at the last 24 hours of historical data for that specific placement and that specific waterfall. And so, for example, if you have a rewarded video waterfall that you're using, you're then looking at the real-time trends of the last 24 hours to see what is the highest ad network CPM, and then that's getting ranked up to the top automatically without you actually having to make any manual adjustments. This is typically the option that I would say the majority of publishers I work with use, especially for placements that they are wanting to have less of a hands-on experience with. Sometimes for those really top tier placements or rewarded video where we see the bulk of revenue coming from just because those are higher CPM placements, occasionally they'll use manual priority, which I'll get into in a minute. But automatic optimizations are great. If you are getting started with monetization or you're new to using a mediation platform, this also gives you a really clear litmus test of just how effective that algorithm is to then be able to look at all the different ad networks and demand sources you're using and then having those be prioritized automatically based on the CPMs. One thing that I do want to note when using automatic optimization, though, is you're then tied to the 24 hours of historical data, meaning it's not forecasting anything new. So if you're wanting to do, for example, a true test with a new network, for example, if you're using a mediation platform and you've never integrated audience network before, what we recommend doing is actually taking us as a network and putting us in the first manual first look position, which just essentially gives us a fair playing field and opportunity to really bid at the highest level possible. Oftentimes with automatic optimization, when you're integrating a new network, it tends to get either slotted into your torso or your tail of your waterfall, meaning even if this network has really great advertisers and really great demand sources and potentially the highest performing CPMs, you'll never actually know it with automatic optimization because it means that everything else is based on the last 24 hours of data. It's already been calibrated. And if it's a new network, it just hasn't gone through that calibration period. And so what I would recommend doing is if it's a new network, putting that up into the manual first look position, at least for a couple of days to let that calibrate. And then you'll be able to really quickly see, just based on overall revenue for your business within that waterfall, whether or not that was a positive revenue lift or a drop in revenue. And so the second option, obviously, when utilizing your mediation is the manual priority. So this is something that effectively means every single placement and instance within your mediation, you are actually manually assigning a CPM value to. I would say the caveat here is this is a super manual process, as you might understand. And so doing this across all of the apps that you monetize and all of the different waterfalls that you have per ad format is going to be incredibly time intensive. And so this is something that I would only recommend doing for really, I would say, high value placements or ones that you're maybe testing some sort of guarantee or first look deal on. This essentially means that you're going to have to be the one deciding what that value is. Of course, you can look at historical data and say this is where an ad network for this specific format has been. But if there are, for example, new networks that you're integrating that are not ones that you've worked with in the past and you don't really have a performance benchmark for, it's going to be less data driven for you to actually then go ahead and guess what that CPM for that ad network should be. But what I would typically say is even when using manual priority, this is still an opportunity for you to, again, test sort of what that upper echelon of what your waterfall could be. And so understanding, for example, if you have a rewarded video and we rewarded video waterfall, and right now your first look is getting, let's just say, $25 CPMs in tier 1 countries. So you have that broken out by US, UK, Canada, et cetera. By having that waterfall set to $30, $25, setting a manual priority either at like 32, 35, somewhere about a 10% increase of what the top of your waterfall already is, means that the fill rate is probably going to be pretty low, maybe sub 15%. But there is at least an opportunity here to see if that new ad network can then at least compete at that level or drive an incremental revenue increase for you. What you might see through testing with that manual priority is that maybe revenue for this whole waterfall only went up slightly, but fill rate went up significantly. And then once you actually have those CPM targets in place in those instances within your waterfall, you can start making adjustments to find where certain ad networks sort of fit best into your mediation waterfall, meaning, for example, if you have a concentration of daily active users in tier 2 countries, you might want to use a mediation that has access to demand sources that are more global versus ones that are more concentrated in tier 1 countries, because that's where you're going to see the bulk of your fill rate from. I would say in general, taking a step back here, Audience Network, because we don't have our own mediation, we see a ton of opportunity in being agnostic and working with as many different mediation platforms as possible. If you go to any of the mediation platforms out there, you'll be able to quickly see what ad networks all of them have adapters for, meaning which ad networks you'll have access to as demand through that specific adapter. We typically do not offer recommendations on a mediation platform to use in particular because there's certainly pros and cons to be had with all of them. Some of the things that we think are most important when, I would say, identifying the best mediation for you is really looking at where your DAUs and where your platform distribution is. So, for example, if you have the majority of DAUs in Japan on iOS, then that's going to be completely different than optimizing for an app that has primarily Android US traffic. At the end of the day, you should also be able to achieve close to 100% fill rate. So this is something, again, to be keeping an eye on as you're testing and iterating within a mediation platform and potentially having discussions with multiple mediation platforms. Again, having to make a personal decision between auto optimization and manual optimization is going to be based on the resources you have available to you within your own company to do ad ops management, but also what you're really trying to achieve in terms of revenue lift and how willing you are to be making changes on a regular basis to those waterfall instances. What I would say is make sure that, as like a rule of thumb, all of your SDKs are always up to date. This is a big one for Audience Network, and something that we'll cover in subsequent weeks is understanding what the SDK release cycle is, the adapter release cycle is, and making sure that you're keeping up to date for those. Especially with Audience Network, our SDK releases are somewhat frequent, but we do have the release notes, which are something that we can point to in a few weeks, but it essentially gives you an idea for what the SDK release actually solves for. Right now, there are a couple new SDKs coming out, and so we'll be sharing information on that via the group, but that's something that's always a good, I would say, rule of thumb to be utilizing when thinking about mediation as well. Well, I hope this was helpful. There's going to be a ton of content about mediation coming at you the rest of the week and for the next 2 weeks. Next week, we'll also be hearing from one of our technical support leads, Sarah McKee, who's based out of Singapore, who will be joining us for the next 2 weeks on live video. Both of those will be Thursday at 3 p.m., so feel free to tune in and also ask as many questions as you want. Those are going to be a little bit more granularly and tactically focused on CPM targets, how to optimize those, which ties back into mediation. We're really excited about it, and if you have any questions, please comment and we will be sure to get to those. Thanks.